Thank you. So I'm Zinaida Vojnar. Thanks for having us. I'm from Reavis. We are a pan-European developer, active in London, open in Berlin, and have a large presence in CE. We're currently ranked as the third largest office space developer, so it's all about offices, but we also have some retail. Currently assets ranging of about 2.1 billion. We delivered 1 million square meters in the past 23 years. We have about another 1 million square meter coming in the pipeline. And we basically realized that the way offices are done and the way work is changing, we have to change. So we're currently living a transition, and we are changing the way we work, and we are changing our products. So excited to have this discussion today.
Great, you set that up very nicely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. My name is Colm. I work for an Irish investment bank called Goodbody. We're based between London and Dublin. My area of specialism, what I focus on, is particularly on the listed office sector. So these are listed REITs. So we look in between, particularly Dublin and London, in relation to the two. And what's really interesting for us at the moment, particularly we track the Irish listed REITs, these are guys with significant Dublin office portfolios, is seeing how that relationship is changing between London, between the London REITs and between their shareholders, particularly as the whole Brexit story starts to come into play. So it's something obviously we're happy to chat about later.
Hello there, my name is John Mulqueen. I work with CBRE Global Investors. I'm the head of transactions and the head of offices. CBRE Global Investors, I'm sure you all know CBRE. We are the independent investment arm of the business. We have about $100 billion of assets under management, and about 40% of that is in Europe. My focus is mainly in the UK and the continental European markets, and I'm very interested to be able to take some questions today.
I'm Parry. I founded my company some 30 odd years ago, and we've grown with London in a way and work a lot in the commercial sector in both the City of London and the City of Westminster. So London has these two cities. So that's key to us, but we do a lot of work in residential, and we have a bridge. We have a small office in Singapore, so we work quite globally in terms of Tokyo, Singapore, and Shanghai.
Great, thanks. Well, we may as well just hit the biggest question straight away, just get stuck into it. Offices, as I said, continue to dominate the market. I'm guessing they always will, but they could be wrong given the changes that you alluded to in the beginning. So what is the immediate future? Do you see this changing anytime soon?
Yes, we see it changing. It depends on where you are. The rate of change, perhaps, it's not the same everywhere. There's a lot of talk about the future way of working, well-being, being very user-focused. For the first time, actually, we are hearing the voice of the end user, which is not very typical for our industry. It's been very much an investment-driven market, and this is also how we've been delivering our products. They were very much investor-focused products, but we believe that moving forward, this is not sustainable. This is not the way it will work because of the change of the labor market, the shortage of talent. So the first time, actually, the way we are developing offices are having the end user, the employees, the tenants at the center of our attention. So we're completely rethinking the way we design office buildings. It very much differs from the way it's been done until now. And we also see, and we hear a lot about the disruptors, the co-works, and they clearly identified something on the market that has been missing. So, and there's a clear need for flexibility. This is actually something not too new, but it's just filtering in and now becoming more and more visible. So we also developed our own co-working brand, Hub, which we see an incredible demand for. We already launched it in Warsaw, in Bratislava. We will have it in all our future large-scale developments. This is to complement our existing tenants, the corporates who have a need to be close to this ecosystem, to be using it, to have the flexibility. It also caters to the startup community. More and more startups, new companies are becoming big employers and have an exponential growth. In the industry, we have to cater to those. You cannot do it through your traditional 5-10 year fixed leases. Companies simply don't know 1-2 years ahead where they will be in terms of size. So flexibility is a key. And of course, this has to come, companies as they're changing, comes with transition, change management. So we launched our workspace consultancy. So the whole way we're doing development, it's no longer just about developing an office building and the hardware, but there's a lot more focus on the software component and making them very, very smart building and very user-friendly, which is driven by the new generation and the new technologies who expect that. So to also, where investment may make sense is future smart buildings that are also healthy, well-being, and end user focused and experience focused, and a lot more about experiences, not just working and also co-working.
Yeah, so to sum up, what you're saying is that as a developer, you would expect to see office continue to develop, but of course the actual asset class is evolving along the lines of what you're saying. Yeah, John, as an investment manager, I'm assuming that offices is probably one of the largest components of your portfolio. Just give us a little bit of context there and how you see that evolving.
Yeah, happy to. If you look at the transaction volumes generally across continental Europe and including the UK, typically there's 250 billion of assets traded any 1 year, and offices makes up the vast majority of that, so 60 to 65% of that would be offices. Over the last year or so, we've seen some really big changes in the volumes around logistics and industrial. Obviously, that's becoming a sector that people are very interested in at the moment, and in just 3 deals, there's 16 billion of transactional activity. But if you look at the value of the industrial and logistics space, it's much lower than offices. The other thing I would say is that typically investors look at offices more tactically, so they tend to be trading more often. So the retail assets that are out there tend to be owned long term and managed long term, and therefore the ability to get in and out of that market is more difficult. So my answer, the direct answer to your question is yes. I think in terms of transactional volumes, offices will remain by some margin the leader.
Eric, obviously you're coming at this from a different perspective. I guess if I were to look at your pipeline of new clients or potential clients, offices will be in the mix, there will be other asset classes too. Are you detecting any type of change so far in the work that's coming your way?
Well, yes, I think we have to judge our kind of outcome, if you like, by the success. And success tends to breed success. But it's based in a slightly different sense to the thinking about the internal of the building, because I believe that well-being starts outside the building. So it's context that is absolutely key. Location is the old phrase, but it's how you can read the context that then drives choice. And it seems that in terms of pipeline, in a market that's more difficult, better designed buildings let better and quicker, and that is absolutely proven over the period of the last 20 years when one can read back across decisions that in the speculative market, investors are making. So I'm here, naturally you would say, to champion good design, because I think that is the beginning, and that doesn't stop at the front door.
If I can just add to that, you touched on a very important point, that design and development, we feel that it may increase to some very small degree if you put more thought, time, and investment in your design, not just crank out buildings very quickly. It might last a little bit longer and you need more input, but it will pay off.
I would add, in terms of the question, this fact that as a designer we are a kind of mediator between the developer and the city. So we mustn't forget the context in terms of the city and planning authorities. So we can unlock, through ideas of the use of both buildings and the public domain particularly, opportunities that wouldn't be there without it. So that's another important point.
Could I add to that? Sorry, Colm, I realise I haven't had a chance to speak yet. I would say I had the privilege of working on a project with Eric Parry in his practice. And I would say that from that perspective, you can't control the cycle, but you can control the quality of the product that you deliver. So if you are looking at delivering something of that quality, when there is an occupier, they will come to your product first, and that's very important in managing risk. So if your good development, good design is actually very valuable as an investor to make sure that you mitigate the downside risk.
try to bring those sort of terms back. So if we think about building the best-in-class assets, Eric, have you been mentioning, and also in terms of the development of the multi-use and the changing structure of things, we have to think, well, what's going to be resilient through a cycle and what's going to really ride out the storms? And it will always be the best-in-class assets. They have the highest liquidity. If you look at what's happening in the London market now, we're already seeing secondary offices suffering in terms of valuations moving out. You see weakness in headline rents. Terms obviously are trying to be a lot more generous towards the tenant now. But the best-in-class assets, they have the best liquidity and they will ride through the storm. So it's trying to focus on that, trying to deliver the product which is adaptable to the way things are going. And one of the clients we work with in Dublin, which is about a 1.2 billion or so portfolio, a REIT called Hibernia REIT, and if they've acknowledged sort of the changes in terms of the product they have to supply, it's moving much more towards a multi-let environment where there's shared spaces. So you'll have individual floors, and also all about this emphasis on common areas, common floors, theatres, entertainment spaces, hosting areas, and that's where the real demand is. But what's quite interesting is historically that would never be rentalised. So the value would ignore that and say, well, that's just there as a service. We charge you rent for your office space and we move on. But now more and more the competition is heating up for these sort of creative office spaces. They can rentalise them, so the investor's finally seeing, well, it makes sense to put all these extras in, and the return comes through. So you can see the changes. They make sense as well in terms of, one, a risk management perspective, but two, in terms of actually getting money in the door, which is the key thing at the end of the day.
Just moving on, you touched actually on some, I think, patches where perhaps demand or the market seems a bit softer, but generally speaking, people feel quite good about Europe, don't they? And I think that obviously has some positive aspects for office investment. But can you just, maybe this is a question for, I guess, John, as you're looking at investments across all the different regions, just, is it a patchy sort of economic environment that you're operating in, or is it pretty much good news economically wherever you look? And are we really talking about cities versus countries and so forth?
Yeah, I would guess that some of the comments that Colm made are specific around London, because London obviously has some headwinds. It has some development supply coming online. Occupiers, to my mind, becoming a little bit more cautious about taking space. When you compare that to some of the continental European markets, where the macroeconomic picture is very strong, the availability rates are very, very low, and the development pipeline has not responded in time. So I think that certain markets around continental Europe have a very bright outlook, certainly in the short term, because that supply-demand imbalance exists, which is something which obviously investors look for to drive rental growth.
I'd echo that in terms of our outlook, and also we cover pan-European vehicles, we look at more international view, and it's all about the city focus. The country allocation these days is almost irrelevant. You don't make an allocation, say I'm putting 20% in France, you say I'm going to take 20% in Paris, and you keep it as narrow as that. And if you talk to the shareholder side, that's where their appetite is for. They don't want diversified, broad brush or balanced funds anymore. They want very narrow focused, specialised vehicles, so they can do their own risk management and their own allocation, so they can avoid certain things like this, perhaps the headwind we might see in a London perspective, but it is very much city focused. If you look at where we're sort of forecasting stronger growth and we're more favourable, from a pricing standpoint, we do see absolute weaknesses coming through in the London market, but I still think liquidity will hold up, given the investment appetite beyond the European Union for UK assets. But then if you look in terms of where pricing is going to move, and things certainly from a rental perspective are quite interesting. In northern Italian cities now, in a very particular focus, is starting to look quite interesting. Rents haven't really moved in a decade, yet demand is really starting to tick up now quite aggressively. We're seeing a lot more confidence coming through in the occupier market. So you can see certain pockets where there is opportunity of growth. Even if you look at the longer term play, if you look at the way leases have changed in terms of the incentives around there, and we often compare obviously the internal UK and the Irish markets versus each other and think about how the terms are going to change. If you're an occupier in Dublin, you're going to have to take 12 years term certain is what your minimum is going to be. In the city in London, you can get that down to 3 years. So what you're starting to see is landlords trying to keep their headline rent's quite high, but they're being more generous with the terms, and that's obviously all going to feed through to valuation weakness in certain markets and valuation premiums for others. And I suppose, John, you've probably seen the same in terms of your book.
Yeah, I was going to say, at the risk of disagreeing with another panelist, there's one thing you said that I wouldn't agree with, which is we're also seeing capital that wants that diversified approach, and they do want to have different sectors, different countries, cities actually for offices. You're right there. So I think there's different investors want different things, but there's certainly a lot of investors now that are coming to people who look for a very focused investment plan.
From a developer perspective, I think flexibility is one of the key words, and that we keep coming across over and over, which has an effect on pricing and has an effect on lease term and at the end your whole investment model or financing model. And we see when discussing with end users, they keep coming back to us about flexibility. And again, as I said previously, businesses more and more cannot project 5-10 years down the line. They honestly, maybe offline, admit, I don't even know where I'm going to be 2 years down the line. So flexibility is one of the keys, and this has a premium to it in terms of leases. And again, in terms of geography, it depends on the geographic region. London, as you said, has now shorter term leases. The city, we see the same thing. In CE, it's coming down as well, but there is a need for flexibility and as a price, of course.
Actually, if I just may pick up on one thing I noticed in your company, we were talking before about how you're expanding geographically. As I understand it, you've taken on a project, an investment essentially in London. What is it, One Waterloo Place? Is that what it is?
We acquired One Waterloo recently.
One Waterloo Place.
Yes, Elizabeth House. It's quite large.
Right. So what,
after Brexit.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my question. Right? So you kind of been that phased by Brexit. I mean, is it something so special about that particular location, or are you just making a call long-term London? What is that?
It has multiple aspects to it. First of all, we are committed long-term to London. We believe in London. We plan to allocate about 1/3 of our portfolio. Elizabeth House was a unique opportunity to acquire a very large-scale project, and generally our company is now focused more and more on large-scale projects where we can implement all these new elements, all the new ecosystems, the co-workings, the user experience, the placemaking, and projects like Elizabeth House or others can simply enable us to do so that are of this scale. And we're also watching what's happening with Brexit. Nobody knows, but in terms of occupier demand, yes, there will be a move and relocation from London out towards the rest of Europe and CE. We hope to catch some demand there. But there will be an inflow, and there will always be a continued inflow to London because of the talent, so we aspire to catch them too. So
interesting. I'm being very naughty, by the way. I'm hardly sticking to the script at all. I will get back onto the questions I'm supposed to be asking, but I guess I'm just reacting to some of the things that we're hearing here, which I think are quite interesting. Just one more thing on London. Eric, your organisation, if I'm not mistaken, was it the end of last year you were appointed to design and help obviously get planning permission for a very large skyscraper in London in the square mile. I think I noted it down as being, I want to say undershaft. It's probably, is it undershaft?
It's one undershaft.
One undershaft?
Yeah.
First of all, why the name? Why the name? And two, though, more seriously, just tell me about the thinking behind that. That's it's a 73-storey skyscraper in the financial centre of London at a time when we're told the financial organisations, who I'm assuming would be the obvious occupiers, are thinking about perhaps not being in the square mile as much.
Well, the first answer is very simple. Undershaft refers to a maypole that existed outside a church at that point. So a maypole, around which, so it's kind of an amazing kind of ritual, Anyway, so that's it, but it also is pertinent to the building. The city is obviously metamorphosing. It's becoming very tech-orientated. There's a huge demand, actually, so I don't think there's any sense that it won't happen. It has all its kind of ticks in the box, and it moves on. So in a few years' time we'll see that. And I guess the clever investor is going to catch the cycle at the right time. And I think it's a changing landscape. Insurance is still huge. That EC3 is an amazing. Well, I think the point I would make more broadly, coming back to the first point I was making, is that I think we have a treasure, in the European city. It's the best kind of city to live in and work in worldwide. It's got, the most sophisticated traits of conviviality. That's terribly important. The City of London has been pretty bleak, and the transformation that's now occurring in terms of landscaping at different levels, in terms of the density, which makes it ever more intriguing, is quite fascinating. So I think that all these cities that we might be comparing, like La Défense, Paris, and Frankfurt, they have all got to up the ante in terms of how tall buildings, denser bits of the city can be made really human.
Eric, just on this skyscraper, as I understand it, it will be the second highest building, if it remains that height, after the Shard, which is by London Bridge, in London, for those of you that frequent the city. And by the way, it's a Singaporean owner, is it not?
Partly, it's a mixed investment, but yes.
Singaporean owner developing a skyscraper in London. Just, if this is to be a new development, it has to be pretty snazzy. The Shard had a hotel component as well as offices.
Yeah.
Now, what can we expect from a leading edge architect and what is going to be a signature development? This will tell us a lot, surely, about the way that office development, skyscraper development, I should say, is going to be headed.
Yeah. I don't want to hog this, so I'll be very, very succinct, but thank you for the question. I was instrumental in achieving agreement that the top of the building, top 2 floors, would be used by the Museum of London. So it'll have classrooms of children there, and they can get directly up to the top. So it actually becomes a place for London and not a corporate signature. That's incredibly important. The bottom of the building, the whole raison d'etre of the bottom of the building, is that it's porous. So the whole thinking about the core and the public space refers to my point to the last question. It's about making the public realm great and offering retail and so on. So that I'll go no further than that.
No, but Eric, that's absolutely relevant because, of course, you've got me back on track, haven't you, with the questions, which is really about, you talked about serving the clients and the occupier. Let's just get stuck into this because we are going to see some big changes. You've alluded to them, but I don't think you've actually necessarily got into the meat of this. So what are sort of tomorrow's occupiers looking for? What are the different types of mix that we might see? And how, of course, do you commercialise that? At the end of the day, these things have to make money. I don't know about the museum and who pays for that and whether that's market. Maybe we'll tackle that at another day. But anyway, it's all relevant, right?
Yes, thank you. So discussions with clients are becoming a lot more complex. It's no longer about just square meters and rent and service charges. It's about all the extras. What are you offering? And it's the RFPs, the discussions again are not about the building, but what's beyond the building. What is the building and its surrounding offerings? So this is again why larger scale projects have an advantage of creating a larger set of services and also involving the community. So we are also looking into not just providing investment products and office buildings, but creating an ecosystem and landscaping and placemaking. And what they require is, first of all, finally, it's about well-being and healthy buildings above all. It might seem very, very simple and straightforward, but actually having healthy buildings is not that straightforward. And this is where it comes in that there are aging stocks on the market, and again, depends on geographically where you are. But during the crisis, for instance, in CE, we have a big exposure in CE in prisons. There has been very, very limited delivery, so buildings are becoming older. The technology is not keeping up. The technicalities are not providing the necessary healthy elements like fresh air supply. It may be very simple, but that's where everything begins. And it's all about amenities, services, flexibility, co-working. Actually, we do get that a lot on our RFPs from large corporates. We have a line now where they actually ask for what additional services like co-working, flexible spaces, common spaces you have. So it comes to that as well. And also, but how companies are transforming the way they work, they keep emphasizing there needs to be a change management, and that's very important. So our clients are saying that even those who want to change, it's a challenge for them to actually implement the change. So this is where change management comes in and workspace design. This is why we are also launching a workspace design arm, which is also performed by many of the large agencies, and the corporates, tenants need assistance in implementing the change and having the productivity argument that better quality real estate will actually benefit their businesses by having better employees and more productive employees and less turnover. So it's a very complex discussion. It's no longer about just offers and Excel sheets.
It is complex. Zinaida, we're now right in the heart of what we're trying to tackle here. How will the office sector look in the future? So when I was reading an article in The Economist last week, they were just talking about, I suppose, San Francisco and some of the office developments that you see over there. And they were making the link between people that are not necessarily working from home so much as they're in the office, but they want to feel at home. So now we're talking about less desk space, but it's a more fluid situation. And the Economist called it the chance encounter. It sounds like a dating sort of app, doesn't it? But the chance encounter meaning, if you're working for a company and you're sort of moving around because you're not tied to a desk, you've got more chance to bump into a colleague and of course collaborate in some form or shape that will help whatever business that is going forward. So that's one element. The other element, just on the physicality, might be, hey, let's not have more desks. Let's have a yellow or orange sofa, and let's also have a TV. And while we're about it, why don't we just have a bookcase over there? And before you know it, it looks like you're at home. I mean, I don't know if this is an exaggeration or if this is some kind of San Francisco vibe, but just how far, I guess, are occupiers going with this?
Again, for company, when we speak about the Google and the Facebook offices, it's very important to emphasize, and we get this from architects and space designers, that Google works for Google's, Facebook office works for Facebook. But yes, it's very trendy, and tenants, companies pick up on that and want to have Google type and home feeling like offices. It works for some, not everybody. There's probably a healthy mix where the reality lies. So we see that the future office will be a space of collaboration and where innovation is fostered. Quite honestly, I don't need an office to perform my work. I don't need to go into the office to work. I go in because I want to work, because I want to meet my colleagues, because we have to work on a project. So the office, the physical space of an office, will be a platform of meeting and collaboration and where ideas are born. So it will not be about sitting down to your desk and actually performing to work, because of the digital solutions, you can do that pretty much everywhere. But there will be a lot more to it.
And of course, there is a financial rationale coming through for this as well. And one of the projects we worked on with one of our REITs was Twitter's new headquarters in Dublin. And they only have 7 desks for every 10 employees. And so the whole change in terms of how people sit down to work, how they engage, is moving along quite dramatically. But again, when you provide all these additional services, if you think 10 years ago having a gym in an office was almost unheard of, now it's a prerequisite. It's almost a necessity. You're not going to get a tenant otherwise. And how these sort of services change, and you go back to the Twitters, the Googles, they have restaurants, they have free restaurants, they have gyms, they have cinema rooms, they have all these facilities. But they're not just there for the pure well-being of the staff. If the staff have all these facilities, if they may fit at home, they spend more time in the office, they work longer hours, they're more productive. So there is a clear rationale coming through, which is obviously benefiting on the bottom line as well.
I guess if you asked any of the panelists, or probably any of the people in the audience who are involved in offices, they'll probably all say that you have to start with the occupier in mind. Whatever you're doing, whatever decision you're making, you always start with the occupier in mind. And I think what I've seen has been interesting is that the growth of people like WeWork, who have exploited the fact that real estate landlords have been becoming slower to respond to the demands of the occupier, that they want this very high quality service, that they want flexibility. They've stepped into the middle between the landlord and the occupier and provided those services that they require. So they've been big space takers. And I think what you'll probably see is that a recognition of that from landlords, where some corporates will want to do it for themselves, like Google and Facebook and others who want to continue to manage the profile of their offices. Some office occupiers will ignore it altogether, and some office occupiers will say, I want to use that where I need to use it, and they'll therefore be pressuring landlords to say, we want you to let some of your space to one of these occupiers because we want to use their facilities, and that's something which we see as a benefit. And so there's been a lot of discussion about whether there should be a fight between WeWork and traditional landlords, and actually I think there's a much more synergistic answer where they work together. And I think that's probably the way.
They are forming synergies and complementing services. So this is what we experience, that corporates, traditional tenants are asking us, do you have co-working? So whereas we are concerned sometimes, is it going to hurt our traditional letting that we have co-working spaces in our project? And no, it's actually complementing it, because again, they want to be close to the ecosystem, they want to be perceived as being in a cool environment, and they want to have rent less space. So again, what you touched on, it's basically about, I'm being told by corporate heads of real estate about 140-130% utilization of space. You have 10 desks for 14 people, and numbers are going up. And this is enabled by digital solutions. Again, you need to optimize your space utilization, and that's possible. It just hasn't been done, and very well so. Real estate has been the traditional real estate sector, and developers have been lagging behind identifying this, and this is why the disruptors, so the WeWorks and the likes, have come in and done it quickly and well.
I was just going to say, you paint quite a rosy picture, probably rightly so, right, about the synergies. But just thinking about it from the investment market perspective, that makes it sound almost like if you want to buy a property and it has a WeWork, a flexible co-working tenant, should investors actually be paying a premium to have this mix, let's say, in an office, in an asset class, or should they be thinking, well, short leases, don't really like the sound of that too much, so love the idea, of course, but frankly, I'm going to pay less for that because it's riskier.
It still has to. This is the other point, that because of this bottom-up change, the investment market, the financing market, everyone will have to kind of wake up and start adapting to the change. That it's probably no longer going to be about, again, geographically, where you are 5, 10, 15-year-long fixed leases, no exit options, but how you change the mindset. And yes, I think you'd have to ideally pay a premium for it, but we are having those discussions with our financing banks, with our divestment teams, with the investors, who are standing there, have a very traditional approach to real estate investment, but now the demand has changed, and the way the future leases will be structured. So, and the answer is not, we don't see it yet. So it's in progress to see how that happens.
I'd just add to that, I think that, again, a lot of people talk about the potential covenant risk of some of these occupiers because they're not market tested or market downturn tested. The only thing I would say is that there is the other side to the argument, which is that if you are allowing an occupier like this in a minority part of the building, and that enables your other occupiers to more intensively use their space, you probably have a better argument to increase rents because they'll be using them more intensively. So I think there is two sides to that discussion.
And there's another aspect that I think is really interesting where it tips over. So I mean, having looked carefully at some of the leaders in this territory of the interest of the workplace and breakout space, the richness of the internal landscape, and I would look to Australia particularly as being a leader. I think the point at which a large occupier starts to create, like a Google or an Apple, a campus, smacks, in my mind, of getting to a point where one's talking about gated communities. Because, there becomes a kind of point at which the organisation, in terms of its own internal organisation, becomes like a big brother and defeats the richness of the context and the setting in the city. So you can go too far, by far, in terms of, I think, confusing the role that the interior of an office building has. So I just put that kind of break on. Fascinating as it is.
It is fascinating. And by the way, did you say that Australia is the market leader?
Undoubtedly, I think in terms of the live-work kind of balance, in terms of internal planning, of the workplace, I would put them, Sydney market, for instance.
Not in front of places in the States, surely.
Yeah, I would actually. The design, the level of design. And the level of implementation, the haptic quality of those spaces, I think probably is the world leader. Yeah.
Well, a massive digression, but so what would you ascribe that? Is it just the Aussie mindset? I don't know.
Yeah, they're pretty intense, pretty laid back. They get a balance. And you would say if you wanted to see the best houses in the world, you'd go to Australia too. Plenty of other things you wouldn't go to Australia for, but I mean, there's a sort of. There are things that I think are very fascinating about their market and their commercial market.
If I can just briefly add to that, because the Google keeps coming up as an example, and as said, Google works for Google, but because of the bottom-up approach and the competition on the labor market, because there are all these stories and myths about Googles and Facebooks and these really cool offices, which have become kind of a selling tool on the labor market, clients, the traditional corporates are waking up and thinking, oh, well, maybe we have to change. And no, they will not become Googles, but the office and the space is a tool to that. And because of the recruitment, they are pitching for the same people. The Googles and the IT companies, and many of these big corporates are pitching for the same type of labor that Google has. So this is why there is a kind of, well, or in some places a competition on the office space market, because it's one big talent magnet, what it can be. But it doesn't mean that everybody will have to be a Google, and I completely agree that Google is Google and the rest is the rest, but there's, because of the competition for talent, that's what makes it so attractive.
Well, you're making a great point there. We have a question right here. I guess, do I come down with the microphone? I suppose I do. Yeah, looks like I do. I'll hand this over to you, then you hand it back. Okay? Thanks. Oh, and just say who you are, if you don't mind. That would be great. The company you represent. It's not Google, is it?
My name is Mark van Handel. I have a question for Mr. Parry. Oh, sorry. My name is Mark van Handel. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm a private investor in residential. But I have a question for Mr. Parry. I hear you talk about the inside of the building, of an office building, and also the outside, which is very important. But we cannot be all in the center of London or in the center of Amsterdam. So we have some of the offices will be a little outside of the city. How will you make it attractive, and how will it be affordable to have an attractive office just outside of the city center?
I think that, as a brief, offers a fantastic opportunity, which is totally different to a dense, city centre. And that is that one can do what the German market has done brilliantly in terms of plan depth, aspect, proximity to windows, proximity to nature. So I think if you're looking in those circumstances, there are wonderful attributes of a building in terms of its layout and its organisation that can play on the restorative, world of nature in a really interesting way. So more suburban, or even into the world of the science park and those territories where landscape becomes super important and a huge asset. So I won't go into sort of projects, but I have one outside London, and that was it. The survey was made of it's an organisation with 2,500 employees. The survey was, what do you want? What attributes? Window, view, landscape, good light. These are the aspects of well-being in a building that are much easier to achieve, in the context that is out of the city centre.
And if I can add to that whilst we're speaking about digital transformation, that everything is becoming, will become probably pretty high-tech and very technology-driven, and somebody touched on it, it's extremely important to keep and add the human touch to it, and this makes, again, design so much more important and challenging, and that you have these really cool, smart buildings in the city centres, but you have to add the human touch and design to it because people create it. And that that's a very fine balance, and we have to get that right. So it's a challenge.
Could I just add the investors' angle on that? I guess from I understand everything you've said from an investor's perspective. To my mind, city centres are where I want to be, principally because you can offer that balance of amenity that's already present. If you develop a building which leads to that, the strong preference for me would be to go with the existing organisation, polarisation of things that we're seeing played out in all of the major cities around Europe. So I prefer to be in the city centre.
The big problem with this sort of out-of-town style office schemes and these purpose-built with the public realm, the human touch is fantastic, is if you lose that tenant, you're in trouble. If you have a city centre office and you lose your tenant, there's a lot of other people there. And it's all about that, it's all about that demand. If you build something so much spec-focused and something bad happens, you're in trouble.
And investors keep saying now they're also, clearly because of this trend and because of the changes, they are thinking about, okay, how to move forward. And they say that they want assets that are maybe flexible to change, transformation in the future. So they are saying that, if the need or the profile of the asset may need to change in the future, they want to be able to do that. So this is another element that, depending on location, that the asset should be, as much as real estate is flexible, be able to change the profile.
I'm glad you mentioned the human element, because just actually thinking about the investor perspective here, as these buildings become smarter and smarter, as the connectivity increases, a big part of that, of course, is collecting data on employees, right? Everyone's got their mobile phone and they're using their apps, etc. And it kind of occurs to me, to what extent will employers start tracking their employees to see how long they spend at their workstation as opposed to in the kitchen gossiping, or maybe that's a good thing, as they're supposed to be sharing ideas. But there's that element to it, but there's also the risk, because if something goes wrong and data somehow leaks out into the wrong places, then Mr. CBRE Global Investor, as the landlord, might actually get some negative publicity out of this by owning the building where there's been a massive data breach. I don't know if that occurs to you at all, or if it's something you think about, you try and protect against, but it just occurs to me as one of the risks that, if I were an investor, I would be potentially thinking about down the track.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have all the usual kind of barriers in place to ensure that data isn't leaked. There's also fairly strong human rights that stop you from tracking people on an individual basis and exactly what their movements are and what their behaviours are. But there are also, again, some benefits to understanding the flows through a building and understanding where heat and light and water need to be deployed at any one time. And if you can reduce that by collecting some disaggregated information, I think that's still very positive. But you're right, there is a sensitivity to it, understandably. But I think there's a lot of data out there already.
And occupiers are struggling with this. So our clients.
They are struggling with this too.
They are themselves struggling with it. They say it's a very delicate issue, and they have to figure out how to deal with it. Human rights, compliance, employment contracts. There's a famous one, I don't want to say the name, in Amsterdam building, which is considered one of the smartest buildings. And for instance, there, the major occupier who drove the design and the application of the building actually makes, because I spoke to the client who was involved in this design, they actually make their employees all sign an agreement that they agree to being tracked throughout the building, because this is how the building works via the building app. And yes, it raises a lot of sensitive questions, and I don't think there is still a final right answer.
That's not the World Trade Center Schiphol, is it, where PropertyEU is based?
No, it's not, because we own that one.
You own that one? Yeah, I've got a complaint to raise with you later, perhaps afterwards. Listen, any other questions? I realise we're probably moving into the last 5 minutes. I'm sure I saw Richard Betts. There he is, Richard Betts. I did stick to some of your questions, not all, but I got through some of them. Yeah.
Good. I just wanted to, I don't want to bring it down in any way, but I've just been just doing a session on what could be the next crisis, what risks were. In terms of the office in general, I'm guessing, the last bits of it I've heard have all been very positive about the opportunities that these things create. Are there risk scenarios around that or not?
You're looking at me, aren't you?
Well, first of all, I was looking at Robin to see whether or not, as publisher, I could track all of his activities. And you own the building, so it may all be practical. But anyway,
well, we can talk later. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the other thing to bear in mind with offices is it's clearly the most volatile asset class. So when there is some kind of economic shock, it tends to be the sector which suffers most. So I think it certainly should be in everybody's mind. I think that is reflected in the returns that we would expect from offices. I think it also, you have to view it in the context of any product cycle. But as I said earlier, actually one of the things that's a little bit contradictory is obviously we've got very, very low yields at the moment, historically low everywhere. We've got very low availability rates in most of those markets, but we still have quite low development supply. So in most of the markets, there's some starting to come through. London's an exception. Dublin actually is starting to be some supply coming. So we have to keep a very careful eye on that. But actually, I think many of the markets, the cities that are global cities that you want to be invested in, have a pretty robust outlook.
Good. And I just wonder in terms of I mean, just a quick question to everybody really as a sort of wrap. In terms of when we look towards, how the office sector will look, the developments that you've been mentioning there, and also what the occupier sentiment is, how that's working the investment side, what does that lead you to believe in terms of, I guess, strategically, the big opportunities that will come from that? Maybe just starting with you, Zinaida.
The big opportunity that real estate needs to, and we as well, need to catch up with the digital and technological transformation. That's genuinely an opportunity with the new developments ahead, that we design smart, healthy, good buildings that people enjoy and want to work in. That's an opportunity. I think the co-working, you mentioned threat and volatility, the co-working should complement different times as well, how offices downsize or companies are not made up or downsize, and we believe that there's a transformation ahead, and that's an opportunity.
Okay, right. Bringing it back again to this sort of public realm element, which more and more occupiers are being emphasized on, but even developers starting to see that. There's a number of projects we've been working on through our clients in terms of seeing what they're to do, the emphasis they put on down to minutest detail in terms of the paving in the public street outside, and they see that as a unique angle where they can actually get detail in, they can get that broader interest. And the whole thing is, when we look at these more flexible spaces, which you sort of talk about the growth of these common areas and space areas, sort of the Google style options, more and more you're able to actually collect rent on that, you're able to get a value out of it. And if we can move down that route, you can see that there will be value attached to these things, and that's going to be a lot more beneficial, broader to the sector, because it makes it all more resilient as well. It reduces our income risk, and because we're offering unique product which people want.
Great, thank you. Eric, you can go in if you want.
I was going to say resilience comes in many forms. The whole IT issue is one. It is also in a difficult market. Resilience comes in the form of good design, and it's how buildings weather. It's how buildings go completely beyond the CGI and the wallpapering, the kind of globalized industry that means that a building in Shanghai is going to look like a building in Berlin. It means that design needs to work to its place. One thing that is absolutely true of buildings is, and I use the word advisedly, unique, because they're on the ground they stand on, and they should stand the test of time. That is resilience.
Great.
It's an interesting question actually, because it brings us full circle back to the start. I think it's something that you were saying early on, which is you can't control the cycle, but you can control the quality of what you provide to the occupier. And if you're listening to the occupier, you're providing great environments, you're running the buildings well, so you're offering the services that they need, even in the downturn, you are the one that's most insulated. I think that's something we all need to listen more to the occupiers. It's trite that nobody says it, but we have to genuinely do it.